The good news is that there's a peace deal. The bad news is that the peace deal is not a peace deal, it's a terrorist appeasement deal. And the worst news, and there is worse news in all this, is that not only is this a deal that appeases terrorists, it's a proposal that dips into every single insane nation building proposition from Afghanistan and Iraq, remixes them together, brings them back out, digs up Tony Blair, former Prime Minister of the UK, wherever he was hiding before this, the guy who helped Islamize the UK, the guy who helped foist every notion that we could just, if we put in enough troops and foreign aid, we could turn Switzerland, we could turn Afghanistan, Iraq into Switzerland. He's back and he's going to be in charge of the plan to do the same thing to Gaza. How do you think it's going to work out? Here I'm going to break down every single thing wrong with the peace deal. I'm not even going to talk about what's wrong with trading thousands of terrorists for a few hostages. I'm not going to talk about what's wrong with letting Hamas survive. I'm going to deal with the sheer lunacy of so much of the agreement. First of all, it starts out with Gaza would be a de-radicalized terror-free zone that does not pose a threat to its neighbors. Is there anything at all whatsoever in this agreement that will make that happen? Short answer, no. Long answer, I'm going to show you. Number two, Gaza will be redeveloped for the benefit of the people of Gaza who have suffered more than enough. Have they actually suffered more than enough? Well, they wanted this conflict in the first place. They still want this conflict. When the deal was announced, they're celebrating not because there's going to be an end to the violence, because they believe that they won, and they arguably did win. They're celebrating this as a Hamas victory. If you look at the polls, the public opinion there is divided between whether they want Hamas to pursue a jihad against non-Muslims or they want the PLO, aka the Palestinian Authority, to pursue a jihad against Muslims. What's not on the table is peaceful coexistence. So, as we should have learned by now in Iraq and Afghanistan, when people do not want to live in peaceful coexistence, and devout Muslims do not want to live in peaceful coexistence, there will be absolutely zero peaceful coexistence. Nor will there be a terror-free zone, because terrorism is not just something that people occasionally do, it's something that they believe in. In this case, Islam preaches jihad. It prescribes a specific method of fighting, killing, and conquering non-Muslims. The idea that a Muslim country is going to be a terror-free zone, well, that's very aspirational. There are a few Muslim countries that are terror-free zones. There are Muslim countries that export terrorism to places like Gaza by financing terrorism in Gaza. Where is Gaza going to finance its terrorism? Probably right back in their own space. But okay, these are two nice aspirational points. Gaza will be a de-radicalized terror-free zone and it will be redeveloped for the benefit of the people of Gaza. Of course, this assumes that Gaza before this was an impoverished open-air concentration camp hellhole. Not actually true. If you look at pictures and videos of Gaza, they had five-star hotels, they had high-end restaurants, they had mansions, they had plenty of people who were living the good life, they had millionaires, they had billionaires. Granted, most of those people were affiliated with Hamas. The upshot then is that redeveloping Gaza to create prosperity is not going to fix it, because there was prosperity in Gaza before October 7th. Prosperity is not going to stop the people involved from launching yet another war. In fact, they actually profit from launching wars, because destroying Gaza, then reconstructing it and making money from the reconstruction is a very good income stream for terrorists, especially Hamas. I'm going to skip over all the various provisions about freeing thousands of terrorists, because frankly, anyone with common sense understands what's wrong with that in the first place. So let's skip all that. We're not even going to delve into that. Let's go to the actual details of what exactly is going to happen here. Once the terrorists are freed and some of the hostages, or all the hostages, and some of the bodies are released. First, we're dumping the Gaza Humanitarian Fund, which was actually an effective mechanism for taking aid out of the hands of Hamas. And instead, point number 8 states that entry and distribution of aid to the Gaza Strip will proceed without interference from the two parties through the United Nations and its agencies, and the Red Crescent, which is the Muslim version of the Red Cross, except with more suicide bombings. In addition to other international associations that will also be allowed to do this. But the upshot seems to be that the Gaza Humanitarian Fund will no longer actually be the ones in charge of things. The UN is going to be in charge, and the UN is, on the ground, is pretty much Hamas. On the ground, the UN has been working hand in glove with Hamas, and putting the UN in charge of aid is going to mean that Hamas is effectively in charge, which is exactly the whole problem in the first place. In fact, one of the things that the UN did was artificially try to create a famine by refusing to distribute aid. So we're going to be turning over aid distribution to the UN, which refused to distribute aid in order to create this whole crisis in the first place. Will the UN be doing this all over again? Almost certainly yes. And the UN admitted at one point that the vast majority of its aid was being intercepted. So the idea that there's not going to be interference by Israel, yes, I'm sure Israel will be prevented from interfering with aid distribution. However, Hamas will not be prevented from interfering with aid distribution. Indeed, the Biden administration promised that Hamas would not be allowed to interfere with aid distribution. That went nowhere. The UN welcomes Hamas interference. In fact, the UN was demanding that Hamas police accompany its aid distribution. The UN actually refused to distribute with any security other than Hamas. So the upshot is having the UN control aid distribution means Hamas controls aid distribution. That's point 8. And that's just the beginning of what we're going to see here. 9 is a wonderful fantasy. It's the kind of fantasy only the people who brought you Iraq and Afghanistan and, Tony Blair could have come up with. Gaza will be governed under the temporary transitional governance of a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee. That sounds very good. A technocratic, apolitical Palestinian committee. It's technocratic. It's apolitical. What could you possibly object to? Well, back in the day, the Bush administration began to get upset at the Palestinian Authority after they'd spent, a generation violating every promise that had been made under the Oslo Accords and stealing all the money and using it for terrorism. So the Bush administration had a great idea. You will never guess what this great idea is. There was going to be a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian government. A technocratic, apolitical Palestinian government. How could you go wrong with that? For the last 20 years, there's technically been a technocratic, apolitical Palestinian government in the West Bank, which is to say that Mahmoud Abbas, who's the guy who actually runs the Palestinian Authority / the PLO, would occasionally appoint some guy who had dealt with the World Bank or some other international aid group, and he'd put him up front and say, this is the prime minister, and he's technocratic and apolitical. Originally, it was a guy named Salam Fayyad, and this guy is going to be a technocratic, apolitical aid manager. And of course, he's going to technocratically and apolitically manage the aid so that much of it goes to the terrorists and finances terrorism. So we've had this now, and at this point, people stopped paying attention to it. I remember back in the day when the New York Times columnist named Thomas Friedman was predicting that Fayyadism, technocratic, apolitical governance, would absolutely be a game changer. That was not a game changer. So a technocratic, apolitical government really means is that Hamas and the PLO are going to put up some guy, some schnook was in charge of aid distribution to Hamas before all this, or some guy who worked for the World Bank or worked for one of these globalist organizations or the UN, and he's going to be the face of the technocratic, apolitical government. Behind the scenes, of course, it's going to be the terrorists pulling his puppet strings. But wait, it gets even better. This apolitical committee will be responsible for delivering the day-to-day running of public services in municipalities for the people in Gaza. Exciting news. This apolitical technocratic government is going to be running things. Quick question, who's running things now? Hamas. Hamas is literally running everything in Gaza. So you're going to have some sort of technocratic, apolitical World Bank guy who's going to step in, and he's going to be the face of the committee that's going to be, the facade behind Hamas, because Hamas is still going to be running things unless you actually have a plan for reconstructing Gaza so that all the people who are running things now are not going to be running things. That's a denazification program, and there's no sign that there's any seriousness about implementing that, because then you have to fire all these people and you have to bring in new people, and, well, how are you going to prevent Hamas from shooting you if you do that? Well, you're not. Anyway, continuing through point 9, this committee, this technocratic apolitical committee, will be made up of qualified Palestinians and international experts, with oversight and supervision by a new international transitional body, the Board of Peace, which will be headed and chaired by President Trump, with other members and heads of state to be announced, including former Prime Minister Tony Blair. Yes, we're bringing Tony Blair out of retirement from whatever he was doing since he Islamized the UK and got a whole lot of people killed in Iraq and Afghanistan to run a Board of Peace, which is great. Question, though, how is the Board of Peace going to actually control events in Gaza? Because Tony Blair is not going to be sitting in Gaza, one presumes. President Trump is certainly not going to be sitting in Gaza unless we want to create a whole green zone in Gaza like we did in Iraq. So what this really means is that there's going to be a board of people, and they're going to be very important people like heads of state, and whatever heads of state are going to buy into this. And those heads of state are going to sit in their respective capitals, and the situation on the ground is going to be exactly what it was before. Because people don't realize, when they see interviews with UN officials, for example, about Gaza, those people are generally not in Gaza. They rarely ever visit Gaza, for that matter. They really want to be in Gaza. That's the funny thing. You have, for example, recently Spanish diplomats did not want to move their diplomatic facilities into so-called Palestinian Arab Muslim-run areas. As much as they, hate Israel, as much as they want the terrorists to have their own state, they don't actually want to be there. So all these international aid groups are actually run from outside. In theory, they're run, because if you're not on the ground managing things, you're not actually running anything. So what they do is you have somebody out front. You have Heinrich, or you have Susan, and they're, in theory, they're managing this international aid coalition that's delivering aid to Afghanistan or Yemen or Gaza or whatever. In practice, it's Ahmed on the ground. And who does Ahmed work for? He works for the Houthis in Yemen. In Afghanistan, he works for the Taliban. And in Gaza, he works for Hamas. So all these aid groups ultimately come down to the terrorists on the ground, because they're the ones who are actually the foot soldiers. And again, we know all this. We've seen documentary breakdowns of this in Afghanistan. We've seen it in Yemen. We've seen it in Gaza. We've seen admissions of it over and over again. Because UNRWA, which is the main UN mechanism, for example, in Gaza, is actually, the leaders admitted that most of it is Hamas. So what you're talking about really is yet another facade, another cutout out front that is not actually going to be on the ground managing the situation in Gaza. Now, who's actually going to be managing the situation in Gaza? Good question. Hamas. Because that's who's still managing the situation. Unless you have a plan to remove Hamas so that it's no longer managing the situation, it's still going to be Hamas. Okay, let's continue. This body will manage the funding for the redevelopment of Gaza until such a time as the Palestinian Authority has completed its reform program, as outlined in various proposals in 2020 and going back about 30 years, because the Clinton administration wanted to reform the Palestinian Authority. The Clinton administration, the Bush administration wanted to reform the Palestinian Authority. The Obama administration wanted to reform. Well, they didn't want to reform it very much. The Trump administration wanted to reform it. The Biden administration wanted to reform it. The Trump administration wants to reform it now over again. I don't know. I don't think the odds of that are all that great, because the Palestinian Authority has been run by one of two people, Yasser Arafat or Mahmoud Abbas. Mahmoud Abbas is now about 300 years old. He's run for election approximately once, many, many, many years ago. I think it was about 18, 20 years ago. So there's not going to be any reform programs, because, there hasn't been any reform in the floor. What the idea of a reform program is taking some guy who's going to be technocratic and apolitical and putting him out front and saying, now we have technocratic, apolitical governance. But let's continue going. So the plan is to have a transitional body that is going to deliver day-to-day services. Those day-to-day services are being currently handled by Hamas, and somehow this body is supposed to replace that and fundamentally transform that until the Palestinian Authority completes its reform program and is ready to take over. Now, what has the Palestinian Authority been doing during this war? They've been negotiating a unity agreement with Hamas in Beijing and Moscow, among other places. So the Palestinian Authority, which has a unity agreement with Hamas, is going to eventually complete a reform program and take over from Hamas. Until then, we're going to have a technocratic, apolitical governance body, which is, the same technocratic, apolitical guy who is out front in the West Bank and Ramallah. I don't know if this is the best plan ever. Let me put it this way. But okay, continuing on, there's going to be an economic development plan to rebuild and energize Gaza by convening a panel of experts. My God, there's going to be a panel of experts! A panel of experts. How can you go wrong with a panel of experts? We had panels of experts in Iraq. We had panels and panels of experts in Afghanistan. We have panels and panels of experts for every humanitarian disaster in the third world, and they fix it. The third world has been fixed for a long time now. We're going to have a panel of experts. My God, a panel of experts. That's magnificent. A panel of experts. There will be thoughtful investment proposals. Wow. Thoughtful investment proposals. And exciting development ideas by well-meaning international groups. I like that they are well-meaning international groups. We're not going to bring in groups that are international groups that are have bad intentions. They're going to be well-meaning. Just like they were in Afghanistan and Iraq, they had well-meaning proposals like, let's go ahead and have 3 cups of tea with everybody in Afghanistan that is going to fix Afghanistan. That was a well-meaning proposal. It was very popular. Let's bring solar panels to Afghanistan. That was another well-meaning proposal. So I'm glad we're going to have well-meaning proposals from international panels of experts who are going to, they're going to get a payment to go ahead and sit down and they're going to be on a panel, and they're going to be experts, and they're going to sit around, they're going to go, we have a plan to fix Gaza. Anyway, this sounds like a great idea. Unfortunately, they came up with this idea a lot before, so there have been a lot of international panels of experts who were trying to help, work out the whole Palestinian problem. So there have been panels and panels and panels of experts. I recall President Bush back in 2004 saying there was a plan to completely also transform Gaza with thoughtful investment ideas. I don't think he used the word thoughtful, but there were investment ideas, and they were going to bring in lots of capital, and Israel was going to withdraw from Gaza, and the investments would come in. The World Bank would manage these investments, and at the end of the day, Gaza would be tremendous. It would be fantastic, and 3 years later, Hamas was running it. So this can't go wrong either. Anyway, yes, there's going to be governance frameworks. I like governance frameworks. It's one of those things that NGOs or Quangos, if you're more European, come up with. Governance frameworks. They have governance framework. They had a governance framework in Afghanistan. As soon as the Taliban advanced, the governance framework got on a plane and ran away. I don't think the governance framework will even have to get that far in Gaza, but they were going to attract and facilitate investment that will create jobs, opportunity, and hope for future in Gaza. One of the things that happened when Israel withdrew was that they left behind greenhouses and other industrial equipment that would actually create an economic development program for Gaza, financed by the World Bank. And those greenhouses, of course, were smashed up and destroyed as soon as the Israelis left, because you're going to be shocked by this, but the people of Gaza, the Arab Muslim population, does not actually want governance frameworks, technocratic panels of experts, or international development. No, what they want to do is kill Jews and other non-Muslims. They're pretty clear about this. They've said this over and over again. We're just choosing not to listen to them. So I don't know if this is going to work out so well, because what they're now looking for is jobs, opportunity, and governance frameworks. What they want to do is decide which set of terrorists to follow in order to wage war against the Jews and then everybody else in the Middle East, and then everybody else in the whole world. They've been pretty clear about this. I don't know why we just refuse to listen to them. Okay. Point 11, a special economic zone will be established with preferred tariff and access rates to be negotiated with participating countries. The current special economic zone in Gaza is they have lots of tunnels, and then they smuggle things through Egypt. I'm sure this will be much more exciting, and it will lead to the arrival of far more metal poles and chemical explosives and things they can use to create more rockets. So, I can only imagine good things coming out of the special tariff zone. I know, I guess a question, this kind of goes back to point 2, that we're going to really provide, redevelop for the benefit of the people of Gaza. Why are we redeveloping Gaza for the benefit of the people of Gaza? They've been such lovely people. Do they like us so much? Does this really seem like something America should be doing? Haven't we had enough in redeveloping Afghanistan and Iraq and other places that hate us, and for their benefit? How about we redevelop Gaza for, I think President Trump originally proposed redeveloping Gaza for our benefit. I'm not saying we should redevelop Gaza for our benefit. I'm saying that maybe it would be better off if it disappeared from the face of the earth. But if we had to redevelop it for anybody's benefit, maybe we should redevelop it for our benefit. I see no argument for redeveloping for the benefit of the people of Gaza, who don't want it in the first place, and certainly don't want us. Anyway, point 12, no one will be forced to leave Gaza. Well, how can that go wrong? Those who wish to leave will be free to do so and free to return. Great. And we encourage people to stay and offer them the opportunity to build a better Gaza. Again, I'm sure there will be no problems with this, because Hamas will shoot anybody who tries to leave. And in any case, there's promises of lots of money coming in, which will be used to enrich the people currently running Gaza, which, once again, I repeat, is Hamas. And why not stay and enjoy that, and then use that to buy some homes in America and Europe, which they're already doing, and then go back and forth from America and Europe while still claiming to be refugees. By the way, if you're going back and forth from the country you're claiming to escape from, you're not a refugee. But Point 13. Hamas and other factions agree not to have any role in the governance of Gaza directly and indirectly in any form. That sounds good. How can you go wrong with that? Of course, there's a minor question of who's going to enforce any of this, because Hezbollah said it was going to disarm, and it was not going to have any role in the governance of Lebanon, and it's still running Lebanon. So we're not actually able to achieve any of this. Okay, next point. All military, terror, and offensive infrastructure, including tunnels and weapons production facilities, will be destroyed and not rebuilt. Again, the same promise was made in Lebanon. None of it has been destroyed, except when Israel has been doing the destroying. There will be a process of demilitarization of Gaza under the supervision of independent monitors. Wow, independent monitors. So this whole plan to demilitarize Hamas, to eliminate Hamas rule, depends on independent monitors. That's great. I'm not sure who the independent monitors are. It's like hall monitors. Is this going to be a panel of experts providing a technocratic, apolitical governance framework? I certainly hope it is, because this is really exciting stuff. So there's going to be a panel of experts, and independent monitors who are going to go ahead and they're going to oversee everything in Gaza. Who are these independent monitors? Because, Hamas is a terrorist organization that's killed a whole lot of people. So you want these independent monitors to really have a plan for dealing with that. I hope they do. What's the plan? Okay. Independent monitors are going to place weapons permanently beyond use to an agreed process of decommissioning, supported by an internationally funded buyback and reintegration program, all verified by the, wait for it, independent monitors, yet to be announced. Okay, so we're going to decommission weapons and then buy them back and reintegrate them. Wait. Are we decommissioning weapons, or are we buying back the weapons and reintegrating them? Where's this Detroit? We're doing gun buybacks with Hamas? We're doing gun buybacks with terrorists? Great. But the reintegration part worries me more than the buyback part, because exactly what are we reintegrating these weapons to do? They've got rockets. What are we reintegrating these rockets into? We started point 13 with they're going to destroy the offensive infrastructure. Now we're talking about reintegrating and buying back these weapons. So who are these weapons going to? I don't think Israel wants these weapons. Let me hazard a wild guess here. They're going to the so-called police who are going to be running the Gaza Strip. Who are the police? Who are currently their Hamas. So let me just project a potential scenario where we buy back weapons from Hamas to give to the police who are also Hamas. So Ahmed, the terrorist, is going to take a nice check from us. I hope we don't pay him too much. For his AK-47, he's going to turn over the AK-47 to Ahmed, the police officer, who is also Ahmed, the terrorist. Is this very, very crazy? Is this just a wild, out there conspiracy theory? Maybe not, because guess what? This is exactly how the Clinton administration did this with the Palestinian Authority. They created the Palestinian police, who were the same people as the terrorists, and then they gave them AK-47s, and then they used those AK-47s to kill Israelis. Who could have seen that coming? I'm sure this buyback and reintegration program for weapons will not in any possible way go wrong, because the independent monitors will see to that, whoever they are. 14. A guarantee will be provided by regional partners to ensure that Hamas and the factions comply with their obligations and that Gaza poses no threat to its neighbors or its people. So now we've got independent monitors and governance frameworks and regional partners, whoever those are, and they're going to provide guarantees. What are those guarantees worth? We know what Qatar's guarantees are worth. We know what Turkey's guarantees are worth, because they're both propping up Hamas. And what exactly mechanism is there for these guarantees? Well, their word is good. It must be. I mean, Qatar and Islamic terrorists and Muslim terrorist states would never lie to us. They would never do that. It would be so wrong. Their guarantees must be good. Okay, point 15. The United States will work with Arab and international partners to develop a temporary international stabilization force to immediately deploy in Gaza, also known as the Mission Impossible Force. I'm sorry, that's IMF, I think. Or is that the International Monetary Fund? Anyway, the International Stabilization Force sounds a whole lot like the UN Peacekeepers without the UN logo on it. We're going to bring in Arab Muslim armies into Gaza, and we're going to pretend that these Arab Muslim armies are going to do something other than protect the terrorists already there. Because we're very optimistic about this, we have a plan involving independent monitors and panels of experts. So surely the Muslim armies that are going to go into Gaza are going to go ahead and disarm Hamas. Even though there's absolutely no reason to think that they would do that. Because, first of all, they're tied up with Hamas in many cases. In other cases, well, their populace would never stand for them disarming Hamas. So But there's going to be some sort of international stabilization force. This is a great idea that nobody had ever thought of before, up until about 1948 or so. Around the time the UN was created, there were all sorts of UN forces that were supposed to monitor ceasefire agreements between Israel and the local Muslim states and terrorists. You can imagine how well that worked out. Not very, very well. Bottom line is the UN and the various international monitors existed mainly to protect Muslim terrorists, and that's still their function. You go to Lebanon, and UNIFIL, the UN force in Lebanon, literally goes ahead and shields Hezbollah. It goes ahead and steps out of the way whenever Hezbollah wants to attack. Whenever Israel strikes at Hezbollah, the UN shows up and says, "How dare you? You can't do that. It's conflict." So my expectations for the ISF, the IMF, whatever it's supposed to be, are not very great. But this force, this ISF force, which is going to consult with Jordan and Egypt, is also going to provide support to vetted Palestinian police forces in Gaza. Who's vetting these police forces? Where are these police forces coming from? Again, remember, the only police in Gaza are Hamas. The only police in the West Bank are the PLO. In fact, for that matter, the only people who really have guns and any kind of military law enforcement training in Gaza or the West Bank are the PLO, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and other terrorist organizations. This, one would think, is a bit of a problem, because if you're looking for terrorists, well, you're going to find them. If you're looking for vetted police, well, who's vetting them? I'm sorry, independent monitors and panels of experts, I'm sure. There isn't any sort of independent police force that you can actually draw upon. Such a thing does not exist. So that's a bit of a problem, because the ISF is coming in. It's going to consist of seemingly Muslim armies, possibly the French and the UK, but I repeat myself. And they're going to go in and they're going to train these vetted Palestinian police forces in consultation with Jordan and Egypt. Egypt has been all this time smuggling weapons to Hamas, and Israel caught them doing it. And Jordan lives in fear and terror of being taken over by the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the parent organization of Hamas. And Jordan is such a peaceful, coexistent place that they treated a guy who shot up a bunch of Israeli teenage girls on the Island of Peace. Not a joke. He opened fire on a bunch of Israeli teenage girls, treated him as a hero. There's a street named after him. His defense lawyer was elected to the Jordanian parliament. So I don't know if there's peaceful coexistence to be had there so much. But anyway, the ISF, which is yet to be named, which is going to consist of Muslim armies and possibly the Muslim armies of the UK and France, is going to go in and is going to look for vetted Palestinian police officers, who hopefully will not be terrorists, even though they're impossible to find. They're going to consult with Jordan and Egypt, both of whom have had ties to Hamas of their own. And they're going to work with Israel and Egypt to help secure border areas, along with the newly trained Palestinian police forces, in order to prevent munitions from entering Gaza and secure the rapid and secure flow of goods to rebuild and revitalize Gaza, and the deconfliction mechanism will be agreed upon by the parties. Great. Who's going to be responsible for that? I know. Independent monitors assisted by panels of experts and technocratic governance mechanisms. Fantastic. Here's the problem with all this. All this was tried back in the day and was really one of the bases for the so-called Palestinian Authority. We're going to have vetted police forces. Bill Clinton sending a guy named General Dayton to train the independent Palestinian police forces, who turned out to be the PLO, and then became terrorists who went to war against Israel. Big surprise. Considering that Gaza, the majority of Gazans actually were in favor of October 7th, the vast majority, good thing we're rebuilding Gaza for their benefit. Considering that the vast majority of people in Gaza supported October 7th and support Hamas or other terrorists, where are you going to find these police? Even if you discard all the members of terrorist groups, where are you going to find these independently vetted police who don't support terrorism? You'd have an easier time going to Chicago and finding people who don't support voter fraud, who are also members of corrupt political organizations. It's not actually happening. Nor is there any serious plan for it to happen. Israel, point 16, Israel will not occupy or annex Gaza. As the ISF establishes control and stability, the IDF will withdraw based on standards, milestones, and timeframes linked to demilitarization that will be agreed upon between the IDF, ISF, the guarantors, and the United States, with the objective of secure Gaza that no longer poses a threat to anybody. Frankly, good luck. It's going to work one of two ways. Well, possibly one of three ways. Way number one is Hamas, like every terrorist group and like its own past history, will not actually agree to the vast majority of these things. Nonetheless, Israel will be pressured to withdraw anyway, despite the milestones not being met. This has happened this way over and over again. Way number two, the milestones are not met, and Israel goes on a campaign against Hamas. Way number three is that Hamas plays the game with guidance from Qatar enough that the milestones are actually met. Of course, what Hamas does is simply transform itself into the civilian government. The terrorists become the police force, and they're actually still running things. But they actually play the game enough to be able to force the withdrawal to continue. The question is basically how much self-control Hamas has and how much accountability we'll actually expect from it. We'll find out to boot. Because remember, the entire plan for Hamas, their objectives for the so-called ceasefire or peace deal were twofold. One, the less important objective was to release as many thousands of terrorists as possible in exchange for Israeli hostages, which they've accomplished at this point. Based on this agreement, they're going to release about 2,000 terrorists. So they've got that. But their bigger objective number two was to make sure that Israel cannot go in. And this witch's brew of proposals here would seem to create that possibility. You're going to turn over control to the ISF. America, in theory, will have oversight of that, which means that the next time Hamas attacks Israel, Israel will not just be able to go in and, the ISF will say, just let us do our jobs. We're beginning the process of deconfliction here. We're beginning the process of demilitarization. Of course, this will continue on and on and on. Effectively, Hamas will have shields to operate from. That, I think, is the most likely outcome. It's a question of how long this will take and how long Hamas will play the game. It's a question basically of how much self-control Hamas has. Before October 7th, Hamas exercised self-control for about 2 years before launching the attack. So this time around, maybe they'll wait 2 years, maybe they'll even wait 3 years, maybe they'll wait 3 minutes. It's hard to say. And a lot of it's going to come from the signals that are going to be sent by the Trump administration, by the European partners, by the so-called people in the ISF. Basically, the signal that they send is, go ahead, boys, do whatever you want. We're not going to hold you accountable. We're going to hold Israel accountable. Then the fighting will resume very, very quickly. If they're actually going to try to hold Hamas accountable, then maybe Hamas will exercise some self-control. That's a question. Continuing through this, we're almost through this whole thing already. The IDF will progressively hand over Gaza territory to the ISF according to an agreement that they will make with the transitional authority until they are withdrawn completely from Gaza. Not really clear how that's going to work because the transitional authority is in theory answerable to the Board of Peace, which in theory is answerable to the President Trump. So again, not at all clear how any of this actually works. They have a security perimeter presence that will remain until Gaza is properly secure from any resurgent terror threat. People are making much of the security perimeter presence. It's not clear how big this perimeter is. Number 17, in the event Hamas delays or rejects this proposal, the above will proceed in the terror-free areas handed over from the IDF to the ISF. This is actually really a major poison pill because what this is really saying is that if Hamas goes ahead and delays or even goes back to fighting, the ISF will just have control over those areas, and it's going to still insist that Israel withdraw from those areas, and it's going to go ahead and try to maintain some sort of fictional Palestinian state in those areas under this transitional authority. The rest is basically nonsense. You may have noticed that there was virtually up until this point no mention of, well, the vast majority of Gazans actually supported this conflict. They wanted this war. They still want this war. So what's actually being done to prevent that from happening? What's being done to prevent the schools from teaching jihad? All this sort of thing. Well, this is what 18, 19, and 20 covers. There'll be an interfaith dialogue process based on the values of tolerance and peaceful coexistence to try to change the mindsets and narratives of Palestinians and Israelis by emphasizing the benefits that can be derived from peace. This is kind of sad nonsense. In any case, interfaith dialogue is great. As long as it's honest interfaith dialogue in which the Muslim participants explain that the Quran and the Hadiths of it all command them to wage eternal war against infidels until they are submit. Now, Hamas has been pretty open about that beforehand. I think that could be a great form of interfaith dialogue. But then again, we have Islamic terrorists who go before courts in the United States and they go ahead and they say, we ran over those people. We set off those bombs. We wanted to kill all those people in America because the Quran tells us to. And at least in one case, the judges say, no, you misunderstood Islam. So maybe we can have an interfaith dialogue where we'll have Hamas explain, we really have to wage war against you because the Quran tells us so. And the interfaith dialogue person will step in and say, no, you don't understand Islam. I, as a Unitarian, secular atheist, understand Islam much better than you do. Islam is a religion of peace. So I don't think Islam agrees about the benefits that can be derived from peace, or rather Islam means peace, of course, believes that peace is when everybody submits to Islam. So we have different definitions of peace, and the Hamas representatives can explain in the interfaith dialogue that what's really missing here is to understand that the benefits of peace are the benefits of submitting to Islam. 19, while Gaza redevelopment advances and while the Palestinian Authority program is carried out, the conditions may finally be in place for a credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood, which we recognize as the aspiration of the Palestinian people. Is it actually the aspiration of the Palestinian people? If they had aspired to a state, they could have had one a while back. What they aspire to is jihad, and they've made that pretty clear. They want a state. To whatever extent they want a state, they want it through jihad, through war against non-Muslims, or through the destruction of Israel and other non-Muslim entities. Finally, 20, the United States will establish a dialogue between Israel and the Palestinians to agree on a political horizon for peaceful and prosperous coexistence. So let's sum this up. This is nonsense. This is not just nonsense, it's every bad idea that we had before in Iraq and Afghanistan, every bad idea we've had in the West Bank and Gaza before. It's based on absolutely fictional notions of who the people living in the West Bank and Gaza are, what they want out of life, and what they're going to do. What they want is not peaceful, prosperous coexistence. So, when you don't actually understand the motives of the people you're dealing with, the results can't be good. And we don't understand the motives that we're dealing with. We did not understand it in Iraq and Afghanistan. We believed that the Muslim populations of those countries wanted peaceful prosperity. They didn't. We're still not willing to deal with that, so we're not going to have any better results in Gaza than we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. The question is, how involved are we getting to the nation building? Are we putting any money into it? Almost certainly yes. Are we putting any troops into this? That's a concern. We should put 0 troops into this, point 1. Point 2, we should put absolutely $0 into this. The Trump administration should pull out of this agreement as soon as the hostages are released and let the situation go back to the way it is. Gaza is a hellhole. It's a hellhole whose people absolutely hate us. And I understand that President Trump would like a Nobel Peace Prize. A Nobel Peace Prize is not worth getting America involved in nation building again. The one thing that everybody in the United States pretty much agrees on at this point, or everybody who is not still convinced that we could have fixed Iraq and Afghanistan if we just spent more time trying to win their hearts and minds, is no more nation building. All this is nation building writ large. It's nonsense about panels of experts, of international experts coming in and fixing Gaza, of the idea that what the people there want is prosperity, international investment, of talks of technocracy. All this is the same bad ideas over and over again. We've been trying to bring democracy into the Muslim world. We have this idea that if we just bring investment there, if we bring democracy there, they're going to be just like us because everybody wants the same things. And good Lord, President Trump ran on the clear understanding that not everybody wants the same things as we do. That's why we can't have open borders. If everybody wants the same things that we do, why not have open borders? Why not just let everybody in? Everybody does not want the same things that we do. And the people in Gaza and Yemen, Afghanistan, and Iraq did not want the same things that we do. That's why there's been this war, this conflict going on year after year, decade after decade, generation after generation. That's why there's still been an endless conflict in Islam with Christians, with Jews, with Hindus, with Buddhists, with every group you can think of on earth. With every single group you can think of. Except possibly the Amish because they haven't gotten to them yet. Because Islam does not want the same things that we do. They do not worship the same God that we do. They do not believe the same things that we do. They do not share our values. Until we realize that, we are doomed to the same insanity over and over again. And this peace deal is insanity. It's the same insanity. It's the same mistakes we made in Iraq and Afghanistan. This deal, its provisions say that we learned absolutely nothing from Iraq and Afghanistan. So this is a bad deal for Israel. It's a bad deal for any country that's concerned about Islamic terrorism. It's a bad deal for America. It's a bad deal for human civilization.